Okay, so glyphosate, of course, is the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup, which most people know about Roundup. You can go down to the local garden store and pick it up and use it to kill the dandelions in your yard. It's considered to be very, very safe, which is the big problem with it, because the process of approval was not done well. And it basically slipped past the regulatory process so that it ended up becoming extremely popular to use as an herbicide due to its safety. And that's the key issue, because it's not safe. And in fact, I think it's one of the most toxic herbicides that we have in existence today. And it's very widely used. And of course, in the late 1900s, they introduced these GMO Roundup Ready crops. That's the primary genetically modified organism. The primary thing they do with that is to introduce a genetic change in the plant by introducing a microbial enzyme that is resistant to glyphosate. It's a different version of the enzyme that the plant has that gets killed by the glyphosate. Yeah. By giving it this resistant version, you can spray glyphosate all over the plant and it doesn't die. Right. And that's been the basis of the crops of the processed food industry: the corn, the soy, the canola, sugar beets. So that's a big problem. So it's basically pervasive in our food supply. We're finding that out. Now, various advocacy groups are testing and finding glyphosate in all kinds of common foods, especially the sort of processed foods, the cookies and crackers that the kids like so much. Yeah. So we're being poisoned by it every day, and the government refuses to recognize its toxicity. That's the problem.
Yeah. If it wasn't for this book, I don't know, kind of a blurry here. So, Toxic Legacy: How the Weed Killer Glyphosate is Destroying Our Health and the Environment.
Show it here too.
There we go. I've read your books. That one is my favorite. It's definitely the most recent, and I think it does such a great job highlighting how glyphosate actually works, and how that affects so many things as far as our health downstream. Can you explain a little bit of the mechanism that glyphosate is using that makes it such an effective herbicide, but also can affect us?
Right. So the key thing that they've identified that causes it to kill the plants is this enzyme that I mentioned, which is called EPSP synthase. It's in the pathway called the shikimate pathway. That whole pathway is missing from human cells. We don't have that pathway. We don't have that enzyme. And that's the argument they use to say it's safe for us. That sounds really terrific, and if that were all there was about it, that would be great. We could use it and not worry about it. Right. A key problem is that our gut microbes have that pathway, have that enzyme, and use it to make critical nutrients for the host. Yeah. So the microbes get killed off, and those particular supplies supply chain gets depleted because those microbes are not able to make these aromatic amino acids, which are the product of that pathway. And those are not only coding amino acids that go into all the proteins of the body, but they're also precursors to incredibly important molecules like serotonin. All these hormones, serotonin, melatonin, dopamine, thyroid hormone, they all come out of that shikimate pathway. So, yeah. And also the melanin, the skin-tanning agent melanin, yeah. Those things are going to become depleted if the microbes can't keep up with making those precursors, because they're being disturbed by the glyphosate. And of course, it also disrupts the balance of the gut microbiome, yeah. Which then causes all kinds of gut disease, inflammatory bowel disease. And I think it's also responsible for celiac disease, which has become an epidemic. And consequences of messing up the gut microbiome. So that's the critical thing they talk about, that we can get into maybe later about my own specialty, which is this unique aspect that it has that goes beyond EPSP synthase.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You hear that buzzword a lot now because it is important: microbiome, digestive health, gut health. And it seems like there's more and more of that awareness of how central and vital it is to all of our biochemical function. And, optimal gut health, you tend to have optimal health, and dysfunctional gut health, you tend to start having chronic disease. So that's really important. Talking about gut health, we've had to, and other people in my position, caretakers for Alzheimer's patients, in trying to investigate and research what's out there to help. I know I've found that there is almost more information that's useful when looking at autism. because there's
Mm,
so many similarities between the neuroinflammation and some of the gut dysfunction characteristics of those labeled with autism and those with Alzheimer's. So, um, can you explain a little bit the link between glyphosate and autism?
yes, and in fact, I embrace this idea of autism being sort of a child version of Alzheimer's. I think they have very similar processes that are going on that are causing those very different looking diseases, but they actually have quite a bit in common. And I actually recently published a paper linking autism to glyphosate and explained exactly how all the different ways in which, and actually there's many different aspects of glyphosate that are contributing to autism, and how it affects this enzyme called PIN1.
Mhm.
PIN1 is a very unique enzyme that is underexpressed in association with Alzheimer's. That's been shown. And I believe it's also underexpressed in association with autism in the neurons, and that PIN1 has a critical role in neurodevelopment, as well as, of course, in maintaining the health of the adult neurons. And so I feel there's a tremendous parallelism between Alzheimer's and autism, and this PIN1 enzyme actually supports that parallelism. So it's quite, the biology is really fascinating. It's a wonderful puzzle, and I love a puzzle. And so I've had a lot of fun trying to figure out the puzzle of biology. But glyphosate causes both. And in fact, both of those diseases are going up dramatically over time, exactly in step with the rise in glyphosate usage on corn and soy crops. The
Yeah.
correlations are stunning. And so I feel people say correlation doesn't mean causation, but I think in this case it does.
Yeah.
And people also say, how could one chemical be causing so many different diseases?
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I believe glyphosate can cause so many different diseases, not just those two. And of course, all the gut problems,
Yeah.
and also some cancers like thyroid cancer and pancreatic cancer, and of course, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, all these things.
Right.
How can one chemical be so toxic? And the mechanism is actually really fascinating because that has to do with its role as an amino acid analog of glycine.
Yeah.
And glycine is one of the coatings, the smallest coating amino acid that goes into the proteins.
Yeah.
And I think glyphosate's getting in there instead of glycine and messing up those proteins. And when you start to see the consequence of that, if it's true, you can realize it's sort of breathtaking how many different diseases it could cause. And in fact, the proteins that are involved in all these different diseases have critical glycines that are susceptible to glyphosate's mischief. And so the whole puzzle kind of comes together. And you're kind of like stunned when you start to realize, for me, it was really an eye-opening moment when I realized that glyphosate is probably doing that. And it's something that's controversial. The industry is denying that it can happen, but on the other hand, they have done very good studies that pretty much show that it is what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So very interesting. And I wrote about all of that in my book.